key turning in the lock felt foreign. 14 months was a long time. It was long enough for the familiar weight of the old brass to feel alien in his palm, for the specific groan of the bottom hinge to sound like a stranger's complaint. Liam pushed the door open, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a weary but genuine smile already forming on his lips. He'd flown for 22 hours, crossing oceans and time zones, all for this moment. He was a day early, a small surprise he'd orchestrated with the last of his energy. He imagined Clara's face, the shock giving way to delight, her arms wrapping around his neck. The smile faltered, then dissolved completely. The air in the hallway was still, but it was a different kind of still. It was heavy with a presence that wasn't his. A man's coat, a tailored wool monstrosity in a shade of charcoal he'd never seen Clara wear, was draped over the newel post. A pair of expensive leather loafers, not his own worn-in boots, stood neatly by the door. His heart, which had been thrumming with anticipation, began a slower, heavier beat. A cold dread, slick and unwelcome, washed over him. He moved silently down the hall, his soft-soled travel shoes making no sound on the hardwood floors he had laid himself. The living room was just ahead. He heard a low murmur of voices, a man's and a woman's. Clara's laugh, a sound he had replayed in his mind in the lonely quiet of 1,000 nights, echoed from the room. But it was different. It was lighter, freer than he remembered it. He stopped at the threshold, hidden by the deep shadow of the entryway. And then he saw her. Clara was sitting on the sofa, her back partially to him. A man sat opposite her, leaning forward, his hand resting familiarly on her knee. But it wasn't the man that made the world tilt on its axis. It was Clara. Her body, her shape, the very way she occupied the space, was wrong. She shifted to reach for a glass on the coffee table, turning slightly, and the loose-fitting cashmere sweater she wore could no longer hide the truth. She was pregnant. Not just a little. She was profoundly, undeniably 8 months pregnant. The curve of her belly was a perfect, taut sphere, a world of life that had grown in his absence, a world he had no part in. The room seemed to shrink, the air thinning until each breath was a sharp, painful gasp. The 22-hour flight, the exhaustion, the anticipation, it all coalesced into a single, crushing weight in his chest. Clara had thought he was a dreamer, a man content with small things. She and her lover Richard were confident in their new reality, built upon the foundation of Liam's absence. What they didn't know was that while they were building a life in his home, he had been building an empire. And the quiet, unassuming man they had so easily dismissed was about to set off a chain of events that would unravel their world with the quiet devastation of a controlled demolition. You know, it's a strange thing to come home and find you're a stranger in your own life. I'm sure some of you watching have felt that disconnect, that feeling of the world moving on without you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a moment that changed everything. Stick with me because what happens next is a testament to the fact that the quietest people often have the most to say. And don't forget to like and subscribe because you won't want to miss how this story of betrayal finds its justice. Liam didn't move. He simply watched. The man, whose face he now recognized from Clara's society events as Richard Thorne, a smarmy real estate developer with a reputation for predatory charm, squeezed her knee. "He'll be devastated, of course," Richard said, his voice a low, confident purr. "But he'll get over it. Men like him always do. They're built for disappointment." Clara sighed, a sound of theatrical weariness. "I know, it's just the timing. He'll be home tomorrow. We need to present a united front. No apologies, this is our life now." She placed a hand on her swollen belly, a gesture of ownership, of finality. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so utterly complete without him, that Liam felt a wave of nausea. He had spent the last 14 months working 18-hour days, sleeping in a cot on a construction site, sacrificing comfort and connection, all while holding the image of this home, of this woman, in his mind as his North Star. He'd sent nearly every dollar he made from his stipend back to her, believing he was shoring up their future while she was building an entirely new one with another man. He took a single step into the room. The floorboard beneath his foot, one he had always meant to fix, let out a loud, piercing creak. Two heads snapped in his direction. Clara's eyes widened, the color draining from her face. Her hand flew to her mouth, a gesture of shock that felt rehearsed. Richard, however, simply straightened up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before it settled into a mask of smug composure. He was not surprised. He was inconvenienced. "Liam," Clara breathed, her voice a ghost of what it had been moments before. You're early." Liam's gaze didn't leave her. He looked from her shocked face down to the impossible swell of her stomach, then back up to her eyes. The question was there, silent and devastating, hanging in the air between them. He didn't need to ask it. The answer was a living, breathing thing in the center of his living room. His living room, for now. "It appears I am," he said. His voice was steady, unnervingly calm. The exhaustion had vanished, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. He dropped his duffel bag to the floor. The soft thud was the only sound in the suffocating silence. It was the sound of a dream hitting the ground. 14 months earlier, the conversation had happened in this very room. The air had been thick with unspoken things then, too. Liam had spread the acceptance letter on the coffee table, the letterhead bearing the crest of a prestigious architectural foundation. "The ASEAN Sustainable Futures Fellowship," he'd explained, his voice alight with a passion Clara hadn't heard in years. "It's an incredible opportunity, honey. They've chosen me to lead a pilot project in rural Vietnam. We'll be building a community hub, a school, using locally sourced, renewable materials. It's groundbreaking work." Clara had picked up the letter, her manicured nails tapping against the thick, expensive paper. Her smile was thin, brittle. "Vietnam? For how long?" 14 months, maybe a little longer. It's a full immersion." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "And the compensation?" It was always her first question. Liam hesitated, a detail he had practiced. "It's a fellowship, not a corporate gig. There's a stipend, enough to cover my expenses there and send a little home. The real payment is the experience, the prestige. This could put our firm on the map, Clara. This is the kind of work that matters." She had placed the letter back on the table, carefully, as if it were contaminated. "So you'll be gone for over a year, playing in the mud with villagers, for next to no money." It wasn't a question, it was a judgment. Her mother, Eleanor, who had been visiting for dinner, sniffed from her armchair. "Well, that sounds noble, Liam. Very noble." While Richard Thorne is breaking ground on his new luxury condominium tower downtown, you'll be building a hut. How quaint. The comparison was deliberate, a poisoned dart she'd been firing for years. Richard was the man Eleanor always thought Clara should have married. He was wealth, status, and ambition made manifest. Liam, in her eyes, was a perpetual disappointment, an artist masquerading as a professional, a man who cared more about design integrity than profit margins. Liam had held his tongue. He had absorbed the insult, as he always did, with a quiet patience that they mistook for weakness. "It's important work, Eleanor." "Of course, dear," she'd said, patting his hand with a condescending pity. "Someone has to do the important work, I suppose, so the rest of us can live in the real world." He remembered looking at Clara, searching for a spark of support, a flicker of shared excitement for his dream. He found none. He saw only a careful, calculated weariness. She was already detaching, already weighing his absence against her own desires. The suspicion, A small, cold seed in his gut had begun to sprout. He had suspected her materialism was a deeper rot than he wanted to admit. He just hadn't known how deep. He'd packed a single large suitcase and the worn leather portfolio that went with him everywhere. Inside it were his moleskin notebooks, his favorite fountain pen, and a set of preliminary sketches. To Clara, it looked like the meager toolkit of a struggling artist. She couldn't have known that tucked within a hidden sleeve was a single folded document. The letter of intent from Sterling International, a global development behemoth, to acquire his small, innovative firm for a sum that would have made Eleanor choke on her Chardonnay. The fellowship was a cover story, a meticulously crafted test. He was not going to Vietnam to lead a small team. He was going to oversee the master plan for Sterling's multi-billion-dollar Azure Coast Eco-City, a project so vast and ambitious it would redefine the region. He was not a fellow. He was the chief architect and a major shareholder. He had wanted to be wrong. He had prayed during the long flight over the Pacific that he would come home in 14 months to a woman who had missed him, who was proud of his supposed sacrifice. He would have confessed everything, laughed at his own paranoia, and laid his fortune and his future at her feet. He had wanted, more than anything, to discover that her love was not transactional. But as he stood in his living room, staring at the undeniable proof of her betrayal, he knew. The test had been a catastrophic success. His quiet, patient observation had yielded the ugliest of truths. Now, back in the present, the silence in the room stretched thin. Richard was the first to break it. He stood up, smoothing down his expensive suit jacket, assuming a role he had clearly rehearsed. He was the man in charge now. "Look, Liam," he began, his tone dripping with false magnanimity. "This is obviously a shock. No one intended for you to find out this way." Liam's eyes flicked to him, cold and flat. "Really? What way exactly did you intend for me to find out? An email? A text message after I'd unpacked?" Clara flinched. She finally found her voice, though it was thin and reedy. "Don't be like this, Liam. It just happened. You were gone. 14 months is a long time. People change. Lives move on." "My life didn't move on," Liam said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I was living in a shipping container retrofitted into a bunkhouse. I ate rice and fish for a year. I sent every spare cent I had back here, to you, to this house. I was working to build our future. What exactly were you doing?" The question hung in the air, a pendulum of accusation. Richard stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara, a protective gesture that was both insulting and proprietary. "What she was doing," Richard said smoothly, "was living. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do. She wasn't content to wait for your little artistic experiments to bear fruit. She deserves a life of comfort, of security. We found that with each other." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He spoke of destroying a marriage as if he were discussing a corporate merger. Liam felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing a scene from a particularly vulgar play. The anger was there, a white-hot coal in his chest, but it was banked, controlled. His mind was already working, processing, analyzing the structure of his new reality. He was an architect after all. He understood foundations, and the foundation of his life had just been revealed to be nothing but sand. "So this is it then," Liam said, his gaze sweeping over the two of them, the comfortable couple, in the room that was no longer his. "This is the new arrangement." "It is," Clara said, lifting her chin in a display of what she likely thought was strength. "Richard and I are together. We're having this baby. We're in love." The word love sounded obscene on her lips. It was a word she had used with him, a currency she had spent to purchase his devotion, his labor, his trust, and it had all been counterfeit. "I see," Liam said, He bent down and picked up his duffel bag. He looked around the room one last time, his eyes lingering on the framed photos on the mantelpiece. Pictures of their wedding, of their travels, of a life that was now a museum of lies. He felt nothing. The emotional shock had given way to a profound, chilling emptiness. The part of him that loved Clara had been cauterized in an instant. He turned to leave. He needed air. He needed distance. He needed to think. "Wait," Richard called out, a note of command in his voice. "We need to discuss the practicalities." Liam paused at the door but didn't turn around. The practicalities? The house, the divorce. We'd like to handle this cleanly, without a mess, for the baby's sake. Liam finally turned, a humorless smile touching his lips. It was the first time they had seen him smile, and it was more unnerving than any display of rage. "The baby's sake," he repeated softly. "Of course, we wouldn't want to upset the baby." He looked from Richard's smug face to Clara's anxious one. "Don't worry, we'll discuss the practicalities, all of them. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." And with that, he walked out the door, closing it softly behind him, leaving them in the ruins of the life he had built and they had so casually dismantled. They thought they had won. They thought he was a broken man retreating in defeat. They had no idea that he was not retreating. He was advancing to a different battlefield, one of his own choosing, where the weapons were not emotions, but facts, figures, and the cold, hard leverage of power they couldn't even conceive of him possessing. The demolition had just begun. An hour later, Eleanor arrived, summoned by a frantic text from Clara. She swept into the house, her face a mask of perfectly calibrated concern. She found Clara weeping on the sofa and Richard pacing impatiently, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. "Well?" Eleanor demanded, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. "How did it go? Is he gone?" "He knows," Clara sobbed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He came home a day early. He saw everything." Richard snorted. "He saw what we wanted him to see. The man's a ghost, Clara." He barely reacted, just stared with those sad donkey eyes of his and walked out, said his lawyer would be in touch. Eleanor's expression hardened. "A lawyer? On what money? The pittance from his little jungle project?" "Don't be ridiculous. He's posturing. He's a wounded animal, lashing out." She sat down next to her daughter, patting her hand. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but it was stiff, proprietary. "Now pull yourself together. This is a blessing in disguise. It's better to have it all out in the open. We control the narrative now." "What narrative?" Clara asked, her voice muffled. "I've cheated on my husband. I'm having another man's child. There is no narrative that makes me look good." "Of course there is," Eleanor said with dismissive confidence. "The narrative is that you were abandoned. Your husband, your supposed partner, chose to leave you for over a year to pursue a selfish whim. He left you alone, vulnerable. You found comfort and security with a man who was actually present, a man who could provide for you and a family. Richard," she nodded towards him, "is a provider. Liam is a hobbyist." Richard smiled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He liked that, a provider. It suited him. "She's right, darling. We're the victims here, in a way. He neglected his marital duties. The court will see that. Any reasonable person would." This was how they operated. Their reality was a fluid thing, easily reshaped by a narrative of their own convenience. Facts were secondary to perception. Liam's sacrifice was reframed as selfishness. Their betrayal was reframed as a necessary act of survival. In their minds, they were already building the legal and social fortress from which they would launch their demands. "He wants the house, I'm sure," Clara said, her voice gaining a bit of its old strength. "He poured so much of his own money into it after his father passed." "The house is your marital home," Eleanor stated, as if quoting scripture. "You are the expectant mother. No judge in his right mind would throw a pregnant woman out of her home, especially not for a man who willingly abandoned it. "I'll make him an offer," Richard said, setting his glass down with a decisive click. "A generous one. I'll buy out his equity. Give him a few thousand to get himself set up in some sad little apartment. It'll be more money than he's seen in one place in his life. He'll take it. He has no choice." Their confidence was absolute. It was built on a foundation of 1,000 previous interactions with Liam. They had seen his quiet nature as passivity, his lack of interest in their materialistic pursuits as a lack of ambition, his patience as weakness. They were assessing a man they had never truly bothered to see, and so their calculations were profoundly, catastrophically flawed. They were playing checkers against a grandmaster of chess, and they didn't even know the game had begun. "He looked different," Clara said quietly, a sliver of doubt piercing her self-assurance. "When he left, there was something in his eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was, I don't know, it was cold." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "It's called shock, dear. He's a simple man. His simple world has been turned upside down. He'll fall apart and then he'll accept whatever we offer him. Trust me, we hold all the cards." She was wrong. They held a handful of face cards, believing it was a winning hand. They had no idea that Liam was holding the entire deck. Liam sat in the sterile quiet of a hotel room, a generic landscape painting hanging on the wall opposite him. He had showered, the scalding water washing away the grime of travel, but not the cold knot in his stomach. He hadn't called anyone, not his sister, not his friends. To voice the betrayal would be to give it a power he was not yet willing to concede. Instead, he opened his worn leather portfolio. He bypassed the acquisition documents and the sterling contract. He pulled out one of his moleskin notebooks and his fountain pen. The pen was a vintage Mont Blanc, a gift from his father, a man who had been a structural engineer and had taught Liam that the most elegant designs were always the strongest, the most honest. He opened the notebook to a blank page. The crisp, creamy paper was a comfort. For a moment, he simply sat there, the pen hovering over the page. The architect in him, the part of his mind that saw the world in terms of systems, stresses, and structures, took over. He was not processing emotion. He was assessing a failed structure, a marriage. He began to write. It was not a diary entry full of anguish and anger. It was a list, methodical, precise. He drew a line down the center of the page. On one side he wrote assets, on the other, liabilities. Under assets, he began to list the tangible things first. The house, its market value. The savings accounts, now drained. His inheritance, which had paid off the bulk of the mortgage. Then he moved to the intangible. His career, his reputation, his skills, his integrity. The list grew longer. Then he moved to the liabilities column. He wrote Clara's name. Next to it he wrote infidelity, deceit, financial misappropriation. He wrote Richard's name, interference, arrogance, potential business conflict. He wrote Eleanor's name, undermining influence, malice. He looked at the two columns. It was a simple, brutal equation. The structure had failed because the liabilities had been allowed to fester, weakening the core supports until the slightest pressure brought the whole thing down. His absence hadn't been the cause of the collapse. It had merely been the catalyst that revealed the rot within. He had spent years accommodating their casual cruelties, their dismissive attitudes towards his work, his values. He had done it out of love for Clara, believing that his success, when it came, would finally earn their respect. He realized now how naive that was. People like them didn't respect achievement. They only respected power. And they only understood power when it was used against them. He capped his pen and closed the notebook. The path forward was clear. It would not be a messy, emotional confrontation. It would be a clinical, precise dismantling. He would not lower himself to their level of shouting and recriminations. He would simply present them with a new reality, one so absolute and undeniable that their carefully constructed narrative would shatter against it like glass. He picked up his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past the names of friends and family, to a number he had only used a handful of times. It was the direct, private line for Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Sterling International. A man who commanded armies of lawyers, accountants, and executives with a single, quiet word. The phone was answered on the second ring. Harrison, Mr. Harrison, it's Liam Kane, Liam said, his voice level. I'm back in the States. Liam, welcome home. The older man's voice was warm, tinged with a British accent. I trust the project handover went smoothly? It did. Everything is on schedule. Excellent. I assume you're taking some well-deserved time off before you join us at headquarters. Liam looked out the hotel window at the indifferent city lights. Actually, a personal matter has come up that requires my attention. I may need to leverage some of the firm's legal resources. There was a brief pause. Is everything all right, my boy? Harrison's tones shifted from professional to paternal. He had taken a keen liking to Liam, admiring his talent and his lack of pretension. It will be, Liam said. I'm dealing with a breach of contract, a domestic one. I need the best divorce attorney you have, someone who understands complex assets and is discreet. Harrison didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. I have just the man, Arthur Vance. He's a shark, but a very civilized one. He'll fillet your opponents without them even realizing they're bleeding until it's too late. I'll have his office contact you first thing in the morning to arrange a meeting. Thank you, sir. Think nothing of it, Liam. Sterling takes care of its own. And you are very much one of our own. Let me know if there is anything else you require. Anything at all. Liam hung up the phone. He felt the first glimmer of something that wasn't pain or anger. It was control. He was no longer the victim in their drama. He was the architect of its conclusion. They thought they were dealing with the humble fellowship winner. They were about to be introduced to the chief design officer of Sterling International. The week that followed was a study in contrasts. For Clara, Richard, and Eleanor, it was a week of triumphant planning. They met with their own lawyer, a slick family attorney named Marcus Thorne, Richard's cousin naturally, who assured them they had an airtight case. He abandoned her, Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair, a portrait of familial confidence. We'll file on grounds of desertion and emotional neglect. We'll paint him as an absentee husband, more interested in his esoteric hobbies than his wife's needs. We'll be generous, of course. We'll offer him a settlement that makes us look like saints. They spent the days shopping. Eleanor bought absurdly expensive baby clothes from a boutique where the price of a single cashmere onesie could have funded Liam's supposed monthly stipend. Richard took Clara to look at new cars, a top-of-the-line SUV for the family. They had dinner at exclusive restaurants, raising glasses of champagne to their new life, their cleverness, their inevitable victory. They were utterly secure in their superiority. Their arrogance was a bubble, beautiful and iridescent, and completely unaware of the pinprick heading its way. For Liam, the week was one of quiet, methodical preparation. He met with Arthur Vance in a discreet, wood-paneled office that smelled of old books and new money. Vance was in his late 60s, with piercing blue eyes and a mind like a steel trap. He listened to Liam's story without interruption, his face impassive. When Liam finished, Vance steepled his fingers and looked at him for a long moment. They have fundamentally misjudged you, Vance said. It was a simple statement of fact. This is not a divorce case. This is a corporate takeover of a domestic partnership. Their primary leverage is your perceived weakness and poverty. When we remove that leverage, their entire position collapses. Over the next few days, they assembled their arsenal. Vance's team gathered every financial document, the acquisition papers for Liam's firm, Kane Design, the Sterling employment contract, the stock option agreements, the portfolio statements showing a net worth that was already in the high eight figures. They tracked the money Liam had sent home, showing it being systematically transferred from their joint account to Clara's personal one, and from there to pay off Richard's credit card bills. The deceit was not just emotional, it was financial, and it was meticulously documented. But Liam added another layer. "I want to know about Richard Thorne's company, Thorne Development," he told Vance. "Specifically, I want to know about their commercial bids over the last year." Vance raised an eyebrow. "A little opposition research?" "Let's just call it due diligence," Liam said. It took Vance's team less than a day. The report they produced was damning. Thorne Development was over-leveraged, surviving on a line of credit that was close to its limit. For the past 12 months, they had been desperately trying to secure a contract with a major international player to stay afloat. They had submitted multiple, increasingly desperate bids to be a regional subcontractor for a massive, mysterious project on the coast. The project was called the Azure Coast Development. Liam looked at the report and felt a sense of cosmic, chilling alignment. He remembered the name. He had seen it on a list of rejected bidders. He made another call to Mr. Harrison. "The Thorne Development bids," Liam said, getting straight to the point. "I need to know why they were rejected." Harrison was silent for a moment. "That's a highly confidential internal review, Liam." "I know, but it's become relevant to my personal situation." There was a soft rustling of papers on the other end of the line. "I have the file," Harrison said after a minute. "The initial bids were simply non-competitive, poorly planned, financially unsound. The later ones, our review board flagged them for evidence of attempted bribery of local officials and falsified environmental impact statements. Thorne Development is not just incompetent, Liam. They're crooked. They were permanently blacklisted from any and all Sterling projects. I signed the order myself 6 months ago." Liam closed his eyes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Richard wasn't just a smug adulterer. He was a failing, corrupt businessman. His entire persona of wealth and success was a house of cards, and he was gambling on this new life with Clara to maintain the facade. "Mr. Vance," Liam said, turning to his lawyer, who had been listening on speakerphone. "I believe we have everything we need." Vance allowed himself a small, predatory smile. "Mr. Kane," he said, "this will not be a negotiation. It will be a surrender." The day of the meeting arrived. It was a crisp autumn day, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue, a perfect day for an execution. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at a neutral location, the conference center of a high-end downtown law firm, chosen by Vance for its intimidating atmosphere. Clara, Richard, and Eleanor arrived together, a united front of smug entitlement. Richard was in a power suit, Clara in an elegant maternity dress that showcased her belly, and Eleanor in a Chanel suit that radiated disapproval. Their lawyer, Marcus, met them in the lobby, carrying a slim briefcase. "Ready for the big show?" Marcus grinned. "We'll be in and out in an hour. He'll sign what we put in front of him. He probably can't even afford to pay his lawyer for more than an hour of his time." They rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened onto a hushed reception area of marble and dark wood. A receptionist directed them to the main boardroom. They pushed open the heavy glass doors and stopped. The room was vast, dominated by a mahogany table that could seat 30. At the far end of the table, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. And sitting alone at the head of the table, silhouetted against the bright morning light, was Liam. He was not dressed in his usual worn jeans and simple shirt. He wore a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and no tie. The suit was understated, but the cut in the fabric spoke of a quality that made Richard's flashy pinstripes look cheap. Liam looked up as they entered, his expression calm, unreadable. He wasn't the broken man they had expected. He looked powerful. Next to him sat Arthur Vance, looking like a supremely intelligent hawk, his sharp eyes missing nothing. A flicker of unease went through Clara. This wasn't the sad little meeting in a cramped office she had pictured. This felt different. This felt serious. "Clara, Richard, Eleanor," Liam said, his voice calm and even. He gestured to the chairs on the opposite side of the long table. "Please, have a seat." They sat, the vast expanse of polished mahogany between them, feeling like a chasm. Marcus Thorne sat next to Richard, opening his briefcase with a flourish, trying to reclaim a sense of control. "All right, let's get this started," Marcus said, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. "We've drawn up a very generous separation agreement. In the interest of a quick and painless resolution, we are prepared to offer—" "Stop," Liam said. It was not a shout, but the word had the force of a physical blow. Marcus froze, his mouth half open. Liam leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. "Before we discuss your offer, I think it's important that we are all operating from the same set of facts, because I believe you have been operating under some significant misapprehensions." He slid his worn leather portfolio onto the table, the same portfolio they had seen 100 times, the one they associated with his failed artistic dreams. He opened it, but instead of sketches, he pulled out a sheaf of documents, bound in a neat, professional cover. Arthur Vance spoke for the first time, his voice a dry rustle of old paper. "For the record, my name is Arthur Vance, of Vance, Sterling, and Croft. I am representing Mr. Kane. The document Mr. Kane is placing on the table is a full disclosure of his financial assets, as required by law." He pushed a copy down the table towards Marcus. "You'll find it comprehensive." Marcus picked it up, a confused frown on his face. He opened it to the first page, a summary of net worth. His eyes widened. He blinked, then read it again. He looked up at Liam, then back at the paper, his face pale with disbelief. This is a joke," Marcus stammered. "There must be a typo. The decimal point is in the wrong place." "I assure you our accounting is impeccable," Vance said dryly. Richard leaned over and snatched the document from his cousin's hand. He saw the number at the top of the page. His smug expression vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned, slack-jawed shock. Eleanor and Clara just stared, confused by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. "What is it?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. Liam looked directly at her, his eyes holding hers for the first time. The coldness she had seen before was still there, but now it was sharpened to a razor's edge. "What it is, Clara," Liam said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, "is the truth. You thought I spent the last 14 months on a charity project, a noble, quaint little hobby in the jungle." He let the silence hang for a moment before he delivered the payload. "I wasn't on a fellowship. My firm was acquired by Sterling International. For the past 14 months, I have been the Chief Design Officer and Lead Architect for the Azure Coast Development Project. My compensation package includes a salary, performance bonuses, and a significant block of founders' shares. The number you see on that page is, I'm afraid, quite real." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a world breaking. Eleanor's perfectly made-up face was a canvas of disbelief. Clara looked as if she had been struck, but it was Richard whose reaction was the most profound. The color had drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy yellow. He was staring at Liam as if seeing a ghost. "Azure Coast," Richard whispered, the words catching in his throat. You're with Azure Coast?" "I'm not with Azure Coast, Richard," Liam corrected him gently, the precision of his words like a surgeon's scalpel. In many ways, I am Azure Coast. It was my design, my proposal that Sterling bought. I oversee every aspect of its development, from urban planning to subcontractor approval. The implication hung in the air, a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Richard understood immediately. His entire company's future, his desperate bids, his last chance to avoid financial ruin, had been in the hands of the very man he had been cuckolding and mocking for the past year. Liam continued, his voice calm and methodical as he began his list of grievances. For years I listened to the three of you. I listened to your condescension. Eleanor, you called my life's work quaint. You compared my passion to a child playing in the mud. He turned his gaze to her. She flinched as if he had slapped her. Richard, he said, his eyes locking with the other man's, you called me a dreamer, a disappointment. You stood in my house with my pregnant wife, and you said men like me were built for disappointment. You felt so secure in your superiority, in your world of dirty deals and inflated egos. Finally, he looked at Clara. The anger was gone, replaced by a vast, weary sadness. And you, Clara, you let them. You encouraged them. You stood by and watched as they chipped away at my dignity, at my worth. You smiled and nodded. And all the while, you were lying. You weren't just unfaithful, you were contemptuous. You spent the money I sent home, money I earned through grueling work, on him. He gestured with his head towards Richard. Mr. Vance's team found the records. Dinners, gifts, even payments on his car. You didn't just cheat on me, you made me pay for it. Clara began to cry, silent tears tracking through her expensive makeup. They were not tears of remorse. They were tears of shock, of a dawning, horrifying understanding of her miscalculation. So, no, Liam said, his voice hardening again. We will not be discussing your generous offer. Your offer is based on a false premise. You assumed I was weak. You assumed I was poor. You assumed you held all the cards. He leaned back in his chair. Now let's talk about reality. Let's talk about my offer. Arthur Vance slid another set of documents across the table. It was thicker than the first one. This is our proposed settlement, Vance announced to the stunned room. It is, I should add, non-negotiable. Marcus Thorne, finally recovering some semblance of professional duty, picked up the document with a trembling hand. He began to read, his pallor deepening with every page he turned. This is punitive, he finally choked out. This is completely unreasonable. On the contrary, Vance replied smoothly, it is perfectly reasonable, given the circumstances. Let us review the key points, shall we? He held up a finger. 1. The marriage is dissolved on the grounds of adultery. We have extensive evidence. Ms. Kane will not contest this. It was a statement, not a question. He held up a second finger. 2. All assets acquired by Mr. Kane prior to and during the marriage, including his inheritance, the proceeds from the sale of his company, and all holdings with Sterling International, are his sole and separate property. Given the documented financial infidelity, there will be no claim to spousal support. Eleanor made a strangled sound, a mix of outrage and despair. Clara just stared at her hands, her world crumbling around her. 3, Vance continued, his voice relentless. The marital home. The house was purchased primarily with funds from Mr. Kane's inheritance. However, he is willing to forego a protracted legal battle over it. The house will be sold immediately. The proceeds will be placed in a trust. A flicker of hope appeared in Clara's eyes. A trust. Vance crushed it instantly. A trust for the child, not for you, Ms. Kane. The trust will be administered by an independent trustee appointed by Mr. Kane. It will cover education and healthcare expenses until the child is 18. It is a generous provision for a child that is not his. He paused, letting the words sink in. Which brings us to point 4. Mr. Kane requires a legally binding paternity test to confirm Mr. Thorne is the biological father. Upon confirmation, Mr. Kane will be legally absolved of all parental rights and responsibilities. The trust is a gift, contingent on your full cooperation. The room was utterly silent. Liam's proposal was a masterpiece of legal devastation. He was cutting them out of his life with surgical precision, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their own actions. He was not being vindictive, he was being final. He was ensuring the child would be cared for, maintaining his moral high ground, while simultaneously stripping Clara and Richard of any claim to his fortune. It was Richard who finally broke, his arrogance shattering into raw, desperate panic. "Liam, wait," he pleaded, his voice unrecognizable. He was no longer the smug provider, he was a drowning man. "We can talk about this. The Azure Coast Project, my company, we can be partners. I can be useful to you." Liam looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. It was more insulting than any anger could have been. "Partners?" Liam said softly. "Richard, you seem to be under another misapprehension. You think this is a negotiation. It isn't." He slid one more piece of paper from his portfolio. It was an internal Sterling memo. "This is the executive summary of Sterling's review of Thorne Development. It details your company's financial instability, your falsified environmental reports, and your attempts to bribe local officials. Mr. Harrison signed the blacklisting order himself 6 months ago. Your company was never going to get a piece of my project. You were rejected because you are a corrupt and incompetent businessman." Richard's face went white. This was the final, fatal blow. It wasn't just his relationship that was over. His career, his company, his entire facade of success was gone. Liam hadn't just exposed him, he had annihilated him. "You have no leverage here, Richard," Liam continued, his voice still quiet, still devastatingly calm. "You have nothing I want. You are a liability. In fact, if this memo were to be leaked to the financial press or to the banking commission," he let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. Richard slumped in his chair, a broken man. The fight was gone. Now it was Clara's turn. The tears were flowing freely now, a desperate, last-ditch appeal to a history she herself had desecrated. "Liam, please," she sobbed. "Think of everything we had, the years we spent together. I made a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. But don't do this. Don't throw it all away." Liam looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of his own pain showed through his calm exterior. "I'm not the one who threw it away, Clara. You did. You threw it away for a man in a better suit. You threw it away because you were impatient. You valued things more than you valued people, more than you valued me." He stood up, the movement signaling the end of the meeting, the end of their life together. "You have 24 hours to sign the agreement," he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion. "If you don't, Mr. Vance is instructed to file a lawsuit against you and Mr. Thorne for fraud and misappropriation of funds. And the memo regarding Thorne Development will be sent to every major news outlet in this city. The choice is yours." He picked up his leather portfolio, now feeling impossibly light. He nodded once to Arthur Vance. Without another look at the wreckage of the 3 people across the table, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The aftermath was swift and brutal. They signed. Of course they signed. They had no choice. The power dynamic had been so completely and irrevocably inverted that resistance was futile. The house was put on the market and sold within a month. Clara and Eleanor, forced to downsize dramatically, moved into a small rented townhouse in a far less prestigious suburb. The Chanel suits and designer maternity wear were replaced by clothes bought on sale. The triumphant shopping sprees became anxious trips to the grocery store. Eleanor's condescension curdled into a bitter, simmering resentment, directed as much at her daughter for her poor choices as at Liam for his success. Their world, once defined by status and appearance, had shrunk to the size of their new, diminished reality. Richard's downfall was even more spectacular. Though Liam never leaked the memo, the news of his company's precarious financial state, combined with his sudden inability to secure new lines of credit, caused a panic among his investors. Thorne Development collapsed under the weight of its own debt within 3 months. He was forced into bankruptcy, his assets liquidated to pay off creditors. The luxury cars were repossessed, the downtown condo foreclosed upon. He was ruined, a pariah in the business community he had once dominated. The paternity test confirmed he was the father. He and Clara stayed together, not out of love, but out of a shared desperation. They were two shipwrecked survivors clinging to the same piece of wreckage. Their new life was a quiet, joyless affair, haunted by the ghosts of what they had lost and what they had thrown away. Liam, meanwhile, moved on. He bought a stunning, minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the city, a space of clean lines, light, and air. It was the physical embodiment of his new life, uncluttered, honest, and built on a solid foundation. He threw himself into his work, but it was no longer with the desperate energy of a man trying to prove himself. It was with the calm, focused confidence of a man who knew his own worth. He saw the project through, and the Azure Coast Eco-City became a global model for sustainable development, winning him international acclaim. But the awards and the wealth were secondary. He had learned a hard lesson about the nature of true value. Months after the divorce was finalized, he sat on his terrace, the city lights spread out before him like a blanket of scattered diamonds. He was sketching in his moleskin notebook, not architectural plans, but ideas for something new. He had met with Mr. Harrison earlier that day, not to discuss business, but to lay the groundwork for a new philanthropic foundation. The Kane Foundation would fund scholarships and grants for young architects from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them the kind of opportunity he had pretended to have. He was taking the pain of his betrayal and transforming it into a legacy of creation and support. He was building something again, not out of concrete and steel, but out of purpose. He hadn't become cruel or vindictive. He had simply performed a necessary surgery, cutting away the diseased parts of his life so that the healthy parts could thrive. He had faced the ultimate betrayal not by lowering himself to his tormentor's level, but by rising so far above it that they could no longer touch him. He had learned that true strength wasn't about dominance or control over others. It was about the quiet, unshakable integrity of one's own character, the refusal to be defined by the smallness of others. As he put the finishing touches on his sketch, a small smile touched his lips. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes. He was free. The past was a blueprint of a failed structure, a lesson learned. The future was an open space waiting to be designed. And for the first time in a very long time, Liam Kane felt like he was finally home. It's a powerful thing, isn't it? The realization of your own worth. Liam's story is a painful one, but it's also one of incredible strength and integrity. He didn't seek revenge in the traditional sense. He simply demanded that reality be acknowledged. He showed that the best response to disrespect is not to become like those who wronged you, but to build a life so full of purpose and success that their actions become irrelevant. What do you think is the most important lesson from this story? Is it about the danger of underestimating people, or the importance of staying true to yourself even when others doubt you? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Your perspective makes this community what it is. And if you found this story of justice and vindication compelling, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of karma and consequence. Thank you for being here, and remember to respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that no longer serves you, grows you, or makes you happy?